Oh, hey, welcome back. Uh, Today, right now, we need to talk about the next step in this process, and that's this idea of limiting government. And the idea of limiting government is really important because we've gone from this state of nature where we had no government at all, and we formed a society that was based on a social contract. And then we had to pick kind of the form we wanted to take, and my gosh, how many choices do we have in this? But now we got to ensure that the government doesn't get in the way. And we got to ensure that the government is legitimate and protects our rights, but it's limited at the same time. And that's a key part of what John Locke talks about in his idea of the social contract and his idea of the state of nature. So let's dive right in. Sometimes you might hear people talking about government as an evil monster. They're overreaching, and are there reasons to fear our government? Well, whose side is the government on anyway? Throughout history, there have been some governments that had too much power and ended up abusing that power. They limited people's freedom, they mistreated people, they even committed mass murders, and in some places, that still even happens today. Government isn't evil, but the people who run governments do need to be kept in check so that they can't abuse their power. And there's several ways to keep that government in check so they don't abuse that power. And we're going to dive into each one of those. Get ready. So, the first is a constitution. A constitution is a rule book for a country's government. A constitution usually explains what kind of government a country has and how that government functions, but it also tells us how a country's laws are made, and it explains the rights and the responsibilities of freedom of citizens. Most countries have written constitutions. Some are collections of the ideas of the courts. But no matter what, the Constitution is the fundamental law and the fundamental rule of government upon which everything is based and upon which everything is measured against at the same time. The rule of law means that laws are fair. That means that they're enforced. It means that nobody's above the law. It means that everybody is treated equally. Blind justice is our mark of the rule of law. When a country has the rule of law, everybody has to follow the law. The government leaders, even the president. Nobody's above the law. Citizens feel secure that this government can't do just whatever it wants, and there's procedures in place to make sure that law is enforced. Another fundamental piece, and we see it in our government, as you can see here, is the separation of powers, and that's dividing the power among the several branches of government. When we divide up that power, a country can make sure that no person or no part of government gets too much control. Separation of power works because each branch is able to check or limit what the other branches can do. Each branch is responsible for a different government function. The legislature makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. They all have to work together for our system to function. Then we get to probably one of my most favorite and importance, and that's the consent of the governed. When you give your consent to the government, you're giving permission. And so consent of the governed means giving the citizens of our country a voice to give permission to be governed by the government. We do it by voting. That's the most important and most fundamental way that we give consent of the governed. We have the right to vote, and we can use our right to vote to change the government. By voting, we can even change the Constitution. We talked about this a little bit already, the rights of the minority. And in a system where citizens are the government because leaders are elected by voting, limiting government also means limiting the power of the majority. In voting, the majority rules, but it could be possible for the majority to treat a minority group unfairly. Protecting the rights of the minority means protecting the rights of small or unpopular groups, regardless of what the majority believes. Everybody has to be treated equally. So, what does this look like? Well, in our country, we celebrate democracy. And in our country, we do talk about majority rules. And in democracy, things get messy. And that's why I love it. And so what I want us to do is to take a look at some real examples of how democracy gets a little bit messy, especially in places where maybe we wouldn't expect to find democracy the way we know it. Pay attention, we're going to see democracy in action.